Hello, welcome to Career Launcher. Welcome to Career Launcher series on reading comprehension to help CAT aspirants. Today we have a comprehension passage from the humanities genre, which is not the easiest. So let's see how you do in it. Okay, I'll read the passage and I read it aloud and summarize it for you, and then we will look at the questions and discuss the questions. Read it along with me as I read it aloud. All right, so this is around 500 words. Listening is the dark matter of conversation, shaping the cosmos of any society or relationship. A good listener can turn an ordinary conversation into a life changing one, though we tend to remember their words more than their listening itself. In an ordinary conversation, you tend to listen to the words spoken rather than to what somebody heard. We shout, sing, whisper, rhyme, but describing listening is difficult. Describing speaking is easy, but describing listening is difficult. It's lexicon less obvious. What words do you use to describe listening? What if we saw ourselves as listening animals adapted to receive language rather than merely to speak? Would we describe listening more precisely? What would we want to describe? So now we think of ourselves as conversationalists. We only know about talking. So how the author says, how do you describe listening? It's very difficult. If we had been listening animals, adapted to listening more than speaking, then maybe we would have described listening more precisely. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that the limits of our language define the limits of our world. Perhaps our listening cosmos has been constrained, that means limited, by the lack of common vocabulary. The issue is not a shortage of listening words, but their confinement within specialist disciplines. So now, here again, earlier he said we don't have many words, proper words to describe listening precisely. Now he is saying that maybe the issue is not a shortage of listening words to describe listening, but the confinement within specialist disciplines. All right. So Henry Talk and Jean Aguillard in 2005 sought to rehabilitate general acoustic awareness with terms like remanence. Remanence is a continuation of a sound no longer heard, and phonotone, the feeling of euphoria provoked by a sound perception. So they came up with new words to describe different types of sounds. Pauline Oliveros coined deep listening after performing in an underground cistern, suggesting it encompassed the whole of the space time continuum of perceptible sound. Acoustic ecologists have introduced terms like sound mark for a sound of special significance. All right, so here you have people who have used different terms to describe sound. One writer profoundly shaped the idea of listening, and that is Rainer Maria Rilke. Though he published original works in his 30s, it was the poem cycles he wrote later as a self conscious receiver that defined his reputation. So he is a poet, very famous poet, but it was the poem cycles, according to the author, it was the poem cycles he wrote later that where he was a self-conscious receiver, and that defined his reputation. His listening cosmos, the words he used to understand it, and the relationships he depended on, all informed his greatest poetry. Like us, Rilke lived through the greatest technological shifts. What were the greatest technological shifts of his time? The telephone, patented in 1876, the phonograph, 1877, severed speech from the body, allowing voices to travel and be endlessly reproduced and exist beyond death. He recorded this transition in a childhood memory of constructing a primitive phonograph. The sound, which had been ours, came back to us tremblingly, haltingly from the paper funnel, uncertain, infinitely soft and hesitating, fading out altogether in places. Each time the effect was complete. Our class rarely silent, achieved an astonishing quiet. We were confronting a new and infinitely delicate point in reality from which something far greater than ourselves, yet indescribably immature, seemed to seek our help. Now, this is heavy philosophy. So, he recorded his transition of recording speech, saying how the sound, recorded sound, came back to us and the effect it had. Right? It seemed to be a very delicate point in reality. It seemed to be something greater than ourselves. At the same time, it seemed to be immature and it seemed to be seeking our help. This experience shaped Rilke's fascination with receiving poetry rather than speaking it. It paralleled his interest in religious receptivity, explored in the Book of Hours, where he wrote love poems to God in the persona of a monk. Influenced by the mystic Angela Foligno, he saw listening as demanding work. So, to Rilke, listening was demanding work, along with the mystic Angela Foligno. Rilke's obsession with sound extended to an eerie auditory fantasy, imagining what might be heard if a phonograph needle traced the grooves of a skull's coronal suture. Can you imagine a phonograph's groove going through the sutures of your skull? This recurring thought made him reflect on poetry's visual bias, sight overladen with the world dominating. So poetry has a visual bias, right? There's a lot of sight overladen with the world dominating constantly, while inattentive hearing contributing little. Influenced by Auguste Rodin, Rilke once embraced a poetic process he called in-seeing. And what is in-seeing? Gazing until he reached the essence of an object before figuratively emerging on the other side. So this is the poem. It's about listening. It's about listening as an experience and how it cannot be described because we didn't have words and things like that, right? Okay, let me just cut off this call. I'm sorry. All right, let's now look at the questions. Question one: what is the central theme of the passage? You've read the passage, talked about uh, listening, how there's no lexicon for listening. That does not necessarily mean that, but we have constrained it to specialist domains. And then he talked about Rilke's contribution, right? That's overall. So let's see which of the options matches that. The evolution of listening as a cognitive process and its impact on technological advancements. The author doesn't talk about the evolution of listening as a cognitive process. It doesn't tell you earlier it was this, then it became. It didn't talk about that at all. The philosophical and artistic significance of listening. He talks about the philosophical aspect, talks about the artistic aspect, particularly in Rilke's life, in Rilke's poetry and poetic practice. This looks like a fantastic uh, representation of the theme. See, the historical progression of sound technology didn't do that. There is no history of sound technology. It originated at this time. This is what happened to the technology. He hasn't done that. The limitations of language in describing auditory experience that he has described, that's not the main theme, and he did not say we need a new lexicon. Part of it is correct, but that's not the main theme. Therefore, the correct answer is option B. Question 2: what is the style and tone of the passage? Analytical. It is analytical, but the author reflects a lot. This. Had we been thinking, receiving rather than speaking animals, maybe we would have thought of listening in a different way. Therefore, it is not so much analytical and objective as reflective and philosophical. Option B, there is no argument here, there is no historical assumption here. Therefore, option B again is the correct answer. Question 3: which of the following is true according to the passage? So, based on the information given in the passage, which of the following is true? Listening, Rilke's engagement with listening was primarily influenced by technological advancements. It was influenced by the technological advancements of his time, but we can't say primarily influenced. The term deep listening was first coined by Rilke. No, it was someone else. We know that. What does the passage say? It was coined by deep listening. Where did deep listening go? Deep listening was by Pauline Oliveros, right? So that is incorrect. The passage suggests that listening can be as intellectually demanding as speaking. It is a demanding process. At 2 points, he has mentioned how it can be demanding. So, C is true. The impact of sound technology on poetry has been largely negative. He didn't say that. He did speak of impact of sound tech. Didn't speak about it as negative. Didn't say it distorts artistic authenticity. These are irrelevant, out of scope of the passage, against the tone. Therefore, C is the correct answer. Which of the following inferences can be validly drawn from the passage? Let's see if we have to go back. It normally inferences are based on the main point. So we have an idea of the main point. We can see which inference is correct. Rilke's understanding of listening was shaped by both mystical and modern influences. Modern influences is sound technology. This is the influence of the mystic mentioned in the passage. So that's correct. Sound recording technology eliminated the need for poetic engagement with listening. No, Rilke's entire poetic engagement of listening happened because of sound recording technology. The passage implies that Rilke believed that listening was a passive act. No, language will always be insufficient in capturing the experience of sound. This part. We have not given much importance to describing it. Therefore, the correct answer is option A. Question 5. What is an assumption implicit in the author's main claim? We know the author's main claim is about listening, about Rilke's contribution, his poetic uh, experiences, how he made it uh, something to do with listening. So let's see what assumption lies behind it. Rilke's poetic evolution was heavily shaped again by his encounters with sound technology. It was um, influenced by sound technology, the phonograph and the telephone, but heavily shaped, and that again cannot be called an assumption. The act of listening can provide access to deeper forms of understanding and creativity because the author's claims and his quotes of Rilke tell you about how listening leads to understanding and creativity. Therefore, B is the correct answer. Let's just look at C and D. Mystical experiences are necessary for artists. No, Rilke had mystical, was influenced by a mystic. Doesn't mean that in general all artists need mystical experiences. All poets tend to privilege visual perception. Generally, poetry, there is a visual bias, but whether all poets tend to do that, Rilke was an exception for one example. Therefore, B is the correct answer. Question 6. Which of the following best expresses the meaning of the concluding lines of the passage? What are the concluding lines of the passage? That heavy philosophy. Concluding line. He says, um, the concluding lines are influenced by Auguste Rodin. Rilke once embraced a poetic process he called in seeing. And what is in seeing? Gazing until he reached the essence of an, to look at an object until you understand the true meaning of an object, go through it completely and figuratively emerge on the other side. So basically, it has to do with the meaning or the implications of in seeing. Let's see which option gives that best. Rilke developed a poetic technique that required intense observation to access an object's true essence. True. Inspired by Rodin, Rilke abandoned auditory elements. No, he developed in seeing doesn't mean he abandoned all other elements. In-seeing was a process by which Rilke recorded and analyzed the visual aspects. No, he gazed until he understood. He looked at an object until he understood what it was. The passage suggests that his poetic process involved listening rather than objective. It involved listening, but this rather than observing part, and in seeing would not be there if it did not involve observation, right? So each option has something incorrect in it. Therefore, option A is the correct answer. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that. The passage seemed difficult, looked difficult, but we got the main point and therefore became easy for us to understand it. All right. I'll see you in another RC session very soon. Until then, keep reading. Happy reading. Thank you.